One of the other things that you said earlier that I loved was this concept of debriefing, which probably seems so intuitive to you. But Harry and I were just talking about this. We're like, why don't we debrief more? Why don't we watch our podcast back? Why don't we like talk about sales calls that we were on together?
Yeah.
Like it's like watching game footage when you played baseball or a sport. Like, why do we just stop doing that when we start working?
You should 100% do that, because debriefing is the best tool that you have to get better at anything you want to get better at. And one of the reasons that the military, let's say SOF in general, is so good is we get the ability to train more than others. We're a small force, whether you're talking about Green Berets or SEALs or Rangers or MARSOC or the TF-160th pilots. You're smaller in size than a Marine battalion, so you can spend more time training. And then the real value of that training is, are you capturing those lessons and debriefing afterwards? And if you're not, then you're going to continue to make the same mistakes. And if you're not debriefing the podcast or debriefing the sales calls, you're going to guaranteed you're going to continue to do some of the same things that are counterproductive. And my last tour in the Navy, I was running all wartime training for the West Coast SEAL team. So it was my job to train every single platoon on the West Coast for war. And by the end of my tour there, I could predict with certainty what platoons were going to be good platoons and what platoons were going to struggle. And the tool that I would use is the debrief. If I watched that platoon taking the debrief seriously, I knew for a fact they were going to get better.
Yeah.
And if platoons didn't take the debrief seriously, or they just blew it off, not only did they not get better, what typically happened is they actually got worse. Because what happens is they're making the same mistakes over and over again. And anybody that's ever been in an environment where the same mistakes are getting made, the frustration level builds up. You start to kind of turn on each other, and all of a sudden the dynamic of that platoon breaks down, and they would spend 6 months training and they'd actually be in a worse place than they would when they started, because they weren't debriefing. Single best tool that you have to make sure that you and your team are getting better and better and better is debriefing.
Why do you think that most people don't take the time to actually go back through their day-to-day, or go back through, they have a mission, or they have a week of work, and, why aren't they spending the time to actually go and do that?
Because people have egos.
Yeah.
And our egos don't like us to examine the mistakes that we make. And it's very easy for me to make all kinds of different excuses about why I don't have time to do the debrief, or why there's no value in a debrief. But really, it's just a certain type of moral cowardice where you're not willing to look at the mistakes that you've made and see what you can do to do things a little bit differently. Hands down.
Yeah.
Ego. What's the secret to a good debrief?
Secret to a good debrief is, one, being open and honest about the things that went right, the things that went wrong. And it's if you're talking about like a personal debrief versus a group debrief, it's a little bit different, because a personal debrief, it's just you going through the lessons learned. But the principles are still kind of the same. Yeah. You want to look at things chronologically. And what I mean by that is, don't just allow the debrief to just bounce all over the place. You're going to miss things. Be very deliberate about it. So for us, we have phases of an operation. You have really 5 phases, but we say 5, it's really 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then there's phase 0, which is your mission planning for that operation. Each one of those phases needs to get debriefed in depth before moving on to the next phase. So it could be like a podcast. Yeah. I would say, look at, from the very beginning, your phase 0 would be, what's your prep for that? How much did you know about the guest? How much did the guest know? What questions did you have preloaded before coming in there? That's kind of your phase 0. And then look at it from the introduction to when you got things rocking and rolling, to the closeout, to the editing, to all those different things. And you want to spend time going through each one of those phases before jumping to the next one, or else you're going to miss something critical in there. And then another big piece is, everybody in the debrief has to have a voice in the debrief, and people should be debriefing themselves, because if it's done right, people will be hardest on themselves if the conditions are set properly for a debrief.
Got it. So that's actually a sign that it's a good debrief, or you have a good team, is that people are taking responsibility over their mistakes.
Yeah, you don't want the debrief to start turning into finger pointing.
Got it.
So what I would do if I was setting up a debrief is, let's say I was the leader, I would open it up with the things that I screwed up first. Hey fellas, here's the things that I could have done better tonight. Boom, boom, boom. Hey, let's rock. Start at phase 0. Let's go through and see what we could have done better. And then people that are involved in those phases should be the ones that are debriefing those phases. Because if it's done right and the conditions are set right, they're going to be one, they know more about it than you do because they lived it. And two, they're going to be typically harsher on themselves than you would be.